Hello and welcome to the Curated Conversation webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Cultural Heritage Management and the Master of Arts in Museum Studies and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on Behind the Curtain with Dr. Daniel Weiss and Marion Gill. My name is Natalie Cross and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Curated Conversations playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Stephanie Brown, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Museum Studies.
Thank you, Natalie, and welcome everybody. We're so glad that you are joining us today for some time to have what I think is going to be a pretty fascinating and a pretty challenging conversation. The title of our conversation tonight is Behind the Curtain. And I got to tell you that when we put our heads together for the title, we left it intentionally vague. As you all know, our world is moving pretty fast, and a lot of things are getting broken or changed or both. We left the title vague because although we knew that our conversation would focus on research universities and the role of museums in campus life, we didn't know what the parameters of the conversation might be. We agreed that we'd define the borders by the course of current events. So we're going to structure our conversation around the challenges that academic museums are facing in these times of fiscal and cultural conflict and opportunities for service that academic museums can meet. Luckily for us, our guests this evening could talk about just about anything museum or university related and hold our attention. We are joined this evening by Marion Gill, who is the Deputy Director of the Cantor Arts Center at Stanford University, where she's responsible for the museum's day-to-day operations and administrative management. She came to Stanford from a role at Princeton, and prior to that, at the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, where she was Director of Museum Planning and Operations. Before that, she spent 25 years at the Smithsonian Institution and played key roles in the planning and opening of 2 museums. And I have to shout out to anybody who was in our seminar last month in DC. Marion was instrumental in the opening of both the National Museum of the American Indian and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. In fact, I have it on good authority that Marion is at least partially responsible for the menus at the cafes. And for that, our field owes her a debt of gratitude. Dr. Daniel Weiss is Homewood Professor of the Humanities at Johns Hopkins and President Emeritus of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He previously served as President and Professor of Art History at Haverford College and from 2005 to 2013 of Lafayette College. He has written 7 books and numerous articles. He's published and lectured widely on a variety of topics, from the Middle Ages and the Crusades to museums to American culture. And he started out his career as a management consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton. Dan received the Business and Society Award from the Yale School of Management, the Van Cortlandt Elliott Award from the Medieval Academy of America, and a whole host of other awards and honors. He is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Council on Foreign Relations, and he is vice chair of the board of the Samuel H. Crest Foundation. He's a member of the University Council at Yale and a trustee of the Wallace Foundation and the Posey Foundation. He holds an MBA from Yale and a PhD from Johns Hopkins in medieval art, where he joined the art history faculty and in 6 years rose to full professor and then chair of the department. He finished his first part of his career at Hopkins by being the dean of the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences. And now we are fortunate to have him back with us as in his role as the Homewood Professor of the Humanities. And you know what? Usually the folks that we have on here have much shorter biographies than either of you do. So you have to forgive me if I got a little bit tangled up in reading about all of your accomplishments, because we usually have folks who have much more of their career ahead of them. I want to ask you both to take a few minutes to talk about your backgrounds, more about your backgrounds, how you came to this work, and what your work is right now. Many of our audience members are students in our program or recent alums, and whenever we get to bring folks who have worked in our field in front of them, we want to take the opportunity to make sure that they share their story. And because I mean, as you all know, I mean, you're both teachers. You've both worked with emerging professionals. You know that every story that you can hear gives you a better sense of what you want your own story to be and what your own story might be able to be. So let's start, if you don't mind, Marion, let's start with you. How'd you get here?
Stephanie, let me begin by thanking you for such a lovely and wonderful introduction, and also for inviting me to join you and Dan in conversation on such an important and timely topic. And Dan, I'm going to try very hard not to embarrass you, but I do have to fangirl just a bit that I'm still in a small state of disbelief that I'm sharing this platform with you, given that you are a giant in both higher ed and museums. Okay, I'm going to pull it together.
That's very kind, Marion. Thank you.
I would love to be able to say that I had a grand plan for landing and working in museums, but I had a very unconventional path. And in my senior year at college, I had a singular goal about my future. And that goal was avoid law school at all costs. And the most expeditious way to delay that was an internship at the Smithsonian. And it's 3 months long. And before the end of my first month, I knew that museum people were special people. And on the last day of my internship, I landed a position unexpectedly at American History. And that affirmed that museum people are the coolest people. And I needed to do this work because they paid me to show up and have fun every day. So how do you move from an unexpected museum professional, entry level, to a deputy director? Just the guiding tenet has been be open to possibility and opportunity. And so not having an end goal in mind allowed me to comfortably accept roles for new projects. And that included the American Indian Museum and the African American Museum. And my last position at the Smithsonian was in their Central Security Division. And when the director or then director invited me to join them, I thought it was so peculiar because while security had been a dashed line to me, I'm not a security expert, but she said, I've watched you manage meetings with 60 people, 70 people, all with competing agendas, all focused on successfully opening a museum. And we want that museum knowledge in-house. And so being open to this unexpected opportunity really prepared me for my next job, which was going to Charleston and helping this small museum that had been fledgling for almost 17 years get off the ground. And I had no sense that what I learned at the security division would be key to my work in Charleston. Just a few years before accepting that position, there had been the massacre at Mother Emanuel. And so not a lot of thought had been given to security planning. And so being able to bring that expertise to the table was invaluable. And then pivoting to Princeton, which was my introduction to higher ed. Again, being open to opportunity and possibility. What do I know about higher ed? Nothing. And I'm working for the provost as her delegate. But what I did bring to the table was the understanding of the complexity of planning, opening, and operating a new museum. So I got to work with a bunch of cool museum people in the planning of their new art museum, which opens this October. And so now I find myself here at Stanford, and I was comfortable with taking on this opportunity because I knew both sides of the house. I knew program and I knew operations. So that's how I got here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dan, what about you?
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to provide a little background. Thanks again for the invitation to join you guys. I think it's fair to say, unless you're a professional musician or a ballet dancer, most of the rest of us got where we are through serendipity. Not really a clear through line from one point to another that makes a whole lot of sense until you reflect back on it. And that was certainly my case. Early in my career, I had the conflict of being very interested in a career in art history in some fashion. Wasn't sure what that was. I wasn't sure if a PhD in an academic career was right for me. But I also love museums, and I was very interested in how organizations work and in management. And I really struggled with those issues and was unclear how to resolve them until a good friend of mine gave me very valuable advice. And that was, don't try to resolve them, but pursue a career that allows you to explore each of those, and you'll find your way. So all of my career has been at the intersection of those two areas of interest, and therefore I have been in and out of university administration and museums and scholarship and teaching. And I've been incredibly fortunate in that way because I didn't map it all out, and I probably couldn't have from when I started. But when I began my career, I as you mentioned in the introduction, Stephanie, I had to work for several years after getting my MBA as a management consultant. And I realized that wasn't the life I really wanted. I was much more interested in integrating more of the arts, and I thought about museums. But I ended up having mostly an academic career because I could see how to do that. And I recognized that whatever comes later, I want to explore that side of me. And I threw myself into research and teaching. I got a PhD and I did that. And as those interests developed and I learned more about myself, I was interested in that issue of connection even more between academics and administration. So my whole career has been doing that. The only museum where I ever worked and the only museum job I ever had was the one at the Met. And it doesn't happen by planning. You know, that's not the way it works. The museum was looking for a leader who had that combination of experiences that I had. At the time I did those things, my mother thought I was just being irresponsible and capricious by not making a commitment, but it turned out those things were all valuable collectively for a leadership position at the Met. So I was invited to come to the Met as president in order to bridge the academic and the professional side, and it all made sense. So my advice to those of you who are thinking about careers is it's not going to be that obvious or easy for you to say at this moment where you're going to end up. But if you pursue what you're interested in with great energy and commitment, and it matters to you, that will lead to opportunities that will not be obvious to you now. And if you're committed to them and you do them well, the opportunities that will come next are likely to be surprising and very positive. So the journey that you're on is learning about who you are and what you're interested in, and the positions that come along will help you figure that out. And I should say, by the time you get to your destination, you're done. So the point of this is not the destination, but it's the process of learning and discovery and exploration.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. you both made me think of the jobs that the work that I have done that has been the most productive and important and meaningful for me has always been work that when somebody said, "Hey, what about this?" I said, "Yes." You know, I could feel it, like there was no question, I had no ambivalence. Yes, I absolutely want to do that. And the things that I have done because I thought, I should really do that. That would be a good thing to have done. You know, those things never turn out to be that much, but it's really hard. It's really hard when you're setting out and you're trying to figure out. It's really hard to know that you can listen to that intuitive reaction. Well, I want to turn to our topic a little bit now. You both took up your current roles at Hopkins and Stanford in mid to late 2023. We were coming out of the pandemic. We were coming into a sort of slightly more confident world, maybe. So I want to start by hearing about what you anticipated your work being when you arrived in these positions, and how or if the trajectory of that work has been altered by current events.
You
You
Should I
can go
go
ahead.
first?
I think
Yeah, I'll let
Marion's
you go,
yielding
Dan.
to you.
Oh,
Yes.
go ahead. Well, for me, I went to Johns Hopkins from the Met in order primarily to teach and to write. And that aspect of my work has not changed. But once I got to Hopkins, and through a series of conversations with Provost Ray Duardna and President Ron Daniels, I was asked to lead a strategic planning effort to explore the role of the arts across the university. How do we think about the ways in which the arts inform and enhance the life of the institution everywhere, not just in arts and sciences and Peabody, but everywhere? And I learned, for example, that in the School of Medicine alone, just medicine, there are over 400 programs that relate to the arts.
Mhm.
So it's a widespread thing. So that work I have been doing since about a year now. And in the recent, following the election of President Trump and the administration that he has brought in, as higher education in the world of culture and much else in the world has been under assault, the institution has had to evolve and reflect on what that means. And paradoxically, what I have found is that one of the things we can all agree on, everyone, is that the art, well, almost everyone, maybe not Donald Trump, but most people can agree that the arts enhance and enrich the quality of life for everyone. And indeed, it is one of the few things that we can do together through shared learning and experience that provides us with a basis for creating communities and civilizations. And therefore, the work that I'm doing now has a different kind of urgency. When we first agreed that I would do it, it was really more an interesting exploration for what Hopkins can do next, given all the work it's already done. And now there's a greater urgency to that because we want to find ways to make sure we can sustain connections across difference and learn how to live together and remind ourselves of what's important in the world in ways that we might not always be thinking about if we just listen to the news.
Yeah.
So my role has evolved in that way, and I'm very comfortable with the idea that advocacy on in this kind of initiative is increasingly important.
Great. Yeah. Marion, how about?
My role, I've been here a year and a half, and I knew coming in that my role was inward facing and that it was to keep the lights on and the trains running. And that has not changed. I think the interesting evolution has been how do we quickly respond and organize ourselves around these rapid changes and the ambiguity and the uncertainty, but also maintaining our program and our operations without disruption.
Right.
And this is one of the smaller organizations where I've worked. And I think that small organizations bring a sense of creativity and nimbleness that larger organizations may not have. It still takes effort, but less effort to turn the ship. And because we have a lean team, we're scrappy. And I love it. So my position, my role, my responsibilities have not changed. We are just organizing ourselves differently.
And what does that look like?
Being mission focused, understanding our priorities, and how do we align our resources, our staff, our time, our money, our space, and our equipment with our evolving priorities. And so we right size our program and our operations to fit with available resources. And so being able to think, how do we de-scope a program? And how do we rethink our operations? Are there projects that can be combined? Are there positions that can be expanded or refocused on the greatest need? And so for me, it's really being open to different ways of working and encouraging and motivating my colleagues to embrace that same mindset.
So, I mean, what I hear is, you both, although you come from really different spots, you both approach this work with a sense of the values of working in the arts and culture, and of the importance of that, especially at a fragmentary and frightening moment like this. Neither Hopkins nor Stanford has mercifully been on the front page of the New York Times quite yet. I'm sure it's coming. But when we take students on the seminars, every institution that we visit tells the students that they don't have enough money, that the budget is really tight. They can't do everything they want to do because the budget is really tight. This is true from the Smithsonian to the smallest house museum. Nobody has enough money. And we always tell the students, look, that's what they're all going to say that. And it's going to be true, but it's going to be true in different ways. Now, Hopkins and Stanford, also, I'm sure that neither of you have quite enough money in your budgets. I'm also sure that those budgets are going to get a lot smaller. So in that, how do you create a culture of generosity and of welcoming and of warmth and of inquiry when all of the forces are saying to retrench? Does that make sense?
Well, I think the issue of finances is one set of questions, and the issue of value-driven leadership and public engagement is another question. So if I may, I'll take your question in two parts. In my experience as a leader, you never have enough money because you work with people who are ambitious. Early in my career, I was at a new organization and I asked an executive how they were doing with their budgets. And they said, oh, we're fine. We got plenty of money. There's no issue. I was immediately concerned that this person wasn't the right fit for the role, because one always wants to try to do the very best you can with the resources you have, whether you're at Princeton or Stanford or a community college with very limited budgets. So pressing budgets is simply a sign of healthy engagement with mission. That said, I think the current moment creates an imperative that is not financial, and it is for us to remind ourselves that cultural institutions, educational institutions serve the public interest and are fundamental to the well-being of a free society. That if we don't have these kinds of institutions, there will be no hope. There is no way for us to create and advance the issues, the work that is central to what it means to live in a free society, if you don't have an educated citizenry, and if you don't have people who are engaged collectively in the appreciation and understanding of human culture and existence. So that ultimately is not a budgetary question. You do what you can with the resources you have. But as we face now an assault on higher education, that, by the way, is not utterly wrong in terms of some of the questions we have to face on our own, not for them to tell us how to do it. I think ultimately it requires us to think very carefully about what we do represent, what is at stake in this moment, and how do we make sure that we're advancing our mission-driven issues in an ethical and responsible way that is aligned with our mission and our obligations as human beings. And if nothing else, I will say, I am not a fan of Donald Trump and his administration, but they certainly have caused us to think about that because the enemy is at the door. And they would just as soon dismantle institutions that advance learning and saves lives in order to fulfill some kind of political agenda. So if we're not sharp and focused, then maybe they will.
Marion.
I'll confess that when the three of us had our planning meeting just shy of a month ago, I ended that conversation feeling certain how I wanted to frame my remarks. But as the last weeks have unfolded, I grew less certain. And that forced me to have a conversation with myself and ask that question, why did I feel less certain? And then I realized that despite our navigating complex times, my position on and belief in academic museums hadn't changed. For me, my unwavering belief in the power of academic museums is grounded in our role, our mission, and our purpose. And, you know, I have kind of 5 guiding pillars. I won't bore you with all 5, but one is serving as a venue for civic engagement and discourse, community building, analysis, and deep reflection of complex issues. And specific to academic museums, we provide students and others with the opportunity to connect abstract ideas and concepts with material culture and historical context. And when I was asking myself, you know, how would I describe that? The abstract idea or notion of freedom. And then I started going through all the museums where I've worked, you know, what is the material culture? What are the objects that speak to what freedom means, what it smells like, what it looks like? You know, how does it change over time? And what is the historical context? What was happening in your local community, in your regional, in your national, international, in that moment in time? But also in the past and looking forward. And so I'll pause there because I can go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Dan, what does that bring up for you?
Well, I think the same. I think the need for us to, the last several weeks have called upon us to think very carefully about what's important. Should we actually concede to the pressure of a government that has massive and awesome resources and power in order to protect what we think is important? Or should we stand up for what we know is important and take the risk of losing some resources? That's a question every institution is facing at one level or another, recognizing that there is a slippery slope here we see playing out across our nation. So I think as leaders, I am not the leader of Johns Hopkins University, and I'm not leading a museum at the moment. But leaders have to reflect on what the implications are of various courses of action and what it means to them. I feel very strongly that if universities and museums don't understand what their core mission is and their obligations to protect that at almost any cost, then how are others going to do so that don't have that kind of visible mission before them? So I think that this is, as George Bush the elder would say, a line in the sand moment.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that we will collectively, as an industry and as a collection of institutions, figure out how to do that. Because if we don't, I think we're lost.
You know, this semester, and I know you're teaching this semester too, Dan. I have, and my museum studies colleagues, we have really struggled with how do we how do we address what's going on in the world with our graduate students? You know, our graduate students range in age from their early 20s to their 70s. They've worked in museums, they haven't worked in museums, they've been lawyers and doctors, and they're veterans, they're members of Army families, they're all sorts of folks. And what is our role as their teachers in a professional master's program, in helping them navigate these times? Some of our students are deeply concerned about it, and some of them are working 2 jobs and they've got kids to take care of, and they're just doing what they can do. But I wonder, and Marion, I mean, I know you're on campus a lot. What is it, and something that we don't get to do because we're an online program, is wander around campus and take the temperature. So what do you see on campus among the student body? I know all of us with gray hair are totally freaking out. But what about the young people that you see on campus, or the students?
Yeah. I will speak to 2 instances. The first one is I gave a lecture the day after election, and I reached out to the coordinator and said, you know something, let's jettison my talking points and deck, and instead let's use the time to take the temperature of our students. And it was troubling and also inspiring. And it was troubling because there was a feeling of angst, uncertainty, that hopelessness. But we ended on a positive note, and this is going to sound really hokey, but there really was a sense that the students in the room were our future, and that change is possible. And so stay the course, have moments of despair, but find your community to provide support, upliftment, celebration, and focus. I take 2 students and they get to invite friends to lunch at the faculty club once a month. And I do that because I understand that our young adults are away from home, need support, but I also want to know what's happening in this generation in terms of their mindset and how I can support them. But I am heartened by the conversations that are really about the future and the changes that they will help usher in. So I share that with the group tonight to say that while I myself may have moments of doubt and concern, I'm getting on board with the students that I interact with in saying, Marion, don't go down that rabbit hole of despair. And I use that as a way to support and uplift my team and my colleagues. And so far it's working, but we're only a couple months in?
Probably a few months in. Dan, what about you? Tell us about your students.
Well, I'm finding I'm teaching on the Homewood campus undergraduates this semester, and I'm finding, to my delight, that the students, though they have every reason to feel disenchanted and cynical, I don't see evidence of that in my classroom. And I know that it is a pervasive problem, but when we're in the room together and we're engaging with our work, I don't see it. They're super smart, they're committed, they're interested. So I think I agree with Marion that I do believe, and we must believe, that the next generation is our future, because they are. the hope is that we can give them the support and encouragement that they will need to do better than we have. Because in fact, one model of idea about leadership is you always want the next generation to do better than you do, because then that means you're on an upward trajectory. If it's the other way around, you're done. So I'd like to believe that the next generation can do better, and indeed, I think they must. But if we reflect on the world we live in, we live in a society that is in many ways defined by institutions. We live and work within institutions. And over the last 50 years, the confidence that the American people have in institutions has declined dramatically in every single category of institution but one.
Yep.
We have seen dramatic declines in respect for Congress, the law, higher education, business, banking, all have declined. The only one that has risen is the military, because I think we have seen coming out of the Vietnam period that disrespecting the military is a disgraceful thing to do when they're, and I'm talking about the people who do the actual fighting and dying on behalf of a free society. And we have learned how to respect them. Whatever the policymakers decide, it isn't about what the soldiers are doing. And therefore, I think we have seen the institution of the military has realized greater respect than it had in the past. But every other institution has declined. So how do young people find a way forward if they're utterly disenchanted with the way Congress operates, the way the legal profession operates, how financial services operate? I don't have a ready answer to that question, but I think it calls upon us who teach and work with young people to do all we can to try to equip them with two things: the skills that they need to navigate in the world today, and some access to values that will help them make up their own mind and understand that everything that they do should be touched by their own ethical framework, whatever that is, that we don't live and work apart from our values. We live within our values. And if we can help them understand what it means to have values aligned with the culture and society you live in, then I'm hopeful that they can do something about those institutions that are all broken.
I will say, Dan, you've mentioned values several times. And for some of us who have gone through strategic planning processes, and at the end, we print it, put it in a binder, and it lives on a shelf. I come from a different model. And what I've been talking about with my department heads, so there are 6 departments in my portfolio, and it is the largest in the museum. And these are the departments that make our programs possible. And so it's very, there's a lot of rapid change, aggressive schedules, uncertainty, ambiguity. And how do you navigate all that as a department head and support your team? So we spend a lot of time in our meetings talking about shared values. And after one of the discussions, one of my department heads asked me, "You've been spending a lot of time talking about our shared values. Why?" And I said, "I have found it helpful in moments like this if I can tether myself to something, if I can ground myself in something. And I don't want it to be ego-driven. I don't want those somethings to be singular in terms of purpose. I want them to be shared by the collective. So we together are tethering ourselves around these ideas of purpose and meaning as we move forward and just get through the daily grind."
Well said.
Let's open it up. Does anyone have questions and thoughts that they'd like to share? You can put them in the Q&A. And while we wait for people to marshal their thoughts, we have talked about this indirectly, but I want to hear from both of you about what is the role of the museum in times of civic and cultural crisis like this one? And what is the role of museums around issues that are contentious? And Dan, I'm thinking here of your arguments in Why the Museum Matters. And Marion, of your work with Smithsonian museums and with other museums that tell really difficult stories, really difficult, painful histories.
Dan, I'll let you go first.
Okay, thanks. Well, as we've been talking about this evening, I think what we need to do at museums, in our museums, is to continue to do the core work that is at the center of our mission, which is to present exhibitions and materials in ways that invites discussion and builds community and helps people remember something, to learn something about the issues larger than their own experience. That part of what museums do is invite people to see things in ways they might not have seen them before. And I think that's more important now than it has been in a long time because of what we're up against. So I think this is not a moment for hiding a little bit to avoid being noticed. It's not a moment for trying to be invisible, but rather it's also not a moment for being deliberately provocative simply for the sake of being provocative, but rather for adhering to the core mission of each institution to present the work in ways that is responsible and professional, and hope that people will come and engage in ways that makes them better versions of themselves, wherever they are and whoever they come from. So I think if we can do that sort of thing, then we are making a contribution to our society that's very meaningful and timely without it being political.
Marion?
Dan, I love hearing your comments. I've written so many notes. I've used at least 15 Post-its in this conversation alone. A couple things, maybe not directly answering your question, Stephanie, but kind of furthering some comments from Dan. I can remember working at the African American Museum in the early days. And, you know, that museum is not afraid to shine a light in the dark corners, not afraid to explore the unvarnished truth. And not everybody's interested in that. And so the founding director, Lonnie Bunch, who is now secretary of the institution, was very clear, made it abundantly clear, all of our work will be grounded in scholarship, not sloppy scholarship, sound, thorough. And let's give our visitors something that they expect. Let's give them something new. And let's give them something to have conversation once they leave the bricks and mortar museum. And Dan, when you talk about not shying away from topics, ideas, lines of inquiry, I remember something that I learned early on in my career that has stuck with me for almost 40 years. And it was in a meeting with leadership, and I'm just a junior level employee. And one of the leaders said, if our visitors see themselves in the stories that we tell, then we have done our jobs. And that doesn't mean it's one for one. That in order for you as a non-Black to connect with the stories in the African American Museum, we're not talking about that. We're talking about ideas. What does it mean to arrive in a new place of living? How do you build community? And that touches upon immigration. Someone like me who's just relocating from one coast to another. And so what are those common themes and through lines that everyone, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, age, can identify with and see themselves and make meaning?
Yeah.
It's
Um,
great.
yeah, yeah. I think, you know, when I my my closest colleague at my first museum job um shared with me the Lois Silverman essay on making meaning, which Dan, because you came up on the art history side of things, I bet you don't know it. But Marion, I bet you do. Where she talks about how you can make meaning, museums exist in order to have visitors make meaning, and that they succeed when they make meaning. Earlier today, I rewatched I guess 10 years ago now, Wayne Thiebaud, the artist, the cakes guy, you know, the fabulous cakes,
Mhm.
did a video about Rosa Bonheur's The Horse Fair at the Met. Do you know that video?
Mhm.
It's fabulous. He's quite elderly, but he's looking at the painting, this enormous painting of horses. And he talks about it in very painterly ways, but he also talks about it hanging, a print of it hanging over his grandfather's desk, you know, and he talks about the details that make this very grand French academic painting into something that you can be like, oh, you know, there was something like that hung in my grandparents' house, you know, or oh, look, that horse, oh, does that horse have somebody taking care of it? Or what do those people do? You know, and so it becomes a place of conversation and a place of connection. Um, and I think that's the thing that when I'm with students in museums and I see them having those kinds of conversations, I think, okay, maybe we're going to be okay. We have a couple of questions. One is from one of our alums. He says, what role do you think that a small local history museum can play in this environment, especially as an independent body maintaining civil society? That's a great question.
It is.
What do you think?
Well, I think that the role that a small history museum can play is exactly the same role that the Smithsonian can play or the Met can play. And that is to provide an opportunity for people to come together to learn, to have a shared experience, to work together to sustain the institution, that if it's a community museum that isn't run and operated by the government, then it is a community-held enterprise. And it requires the same kind of governance mechanisms that a major institution requires, only on a smaller scale. And I think that role is vital in a small town or a big town. So this is a moment to hold tight and celebrate those kinds of institutions and to invest in them. Because again, as we've said throughout our discussion this evening, these kinds of institutions are among the only ways all aspects, all members of our society can come together in common purpose. If you didn't have museums or universities, they can go, where would people find common cause and opportunities to learn together? So this is a moment for institutions like that.
I agree, Dan. When I was in New Jersey, I connected with a small local African American museum, the Stoutsburg Sourland African American Museum, which is in this small AME chapel, but has a large footprint for its property. Talking about building community support, making important, meaningful, impactful connections, all the while sharing these undertold stories, helping people understand the appreciation and necessity of preservation. It was happening in such a small little ecosystem, but talk about the impact. The small team, they've been in national, international papers, but their love, their commitment, their purpose is for their small local community.
Mhm. Mhm.
Exactly.
We have another question that turns a little bit to the. I have another question. We're going to restart. How do you all see institutions' obligations to their communities and to the material culture that they steward being both connected and potentially in conflict? So that's a little that's a little complicated. How is an institution obligated to its community and to its collections? And where do those spots, where's the tension there? Does that make sense?
So this is the first time where I've worked in an environment in a community where there is a very tiny representation of African Americans.
Hmm.
And what struck me is the importance of reaching out to your community. And as an academic museum, it's not just our campus community, it's the local and regional community. And we mounted an exhibition recently entitled Spirit House, which dealt with the diaspora and shared beliefs in celebrating those who have transitioned. And it was a heavy museum. You're talking about loss of life, death, memories, power of place. And so Christina Linden, our director of academic and public programs, convened a number of listening circles with the local Asian community for their feedback on our themes, our messages, our topics, the material culture. And they were just very supportive of what we were trying to do. But they also shared, you know, this is heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be a place where we can decompress. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought back, the Holocaust Museum in DC, they
Mm.
have a space for that.
Mm.
The African American Museum has a place for that. And so we quickly assembled and created a space
Mm-hmm.
for reflection and contemplation. And that is how I love being responsive to our community. It's not just about collecting all this cool stuff. There has to be a mechanism, a way that we have reciprocity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have no idea if I answered the question at all.
I think you answered in the direction of the question.
Thank you. That was very gracious of you, Stephanie.
I think
Uh, Dan, the collection at Stanford is the museum collection at Stanford grew out of the Stanford family's grand tour of Europe. So there's everything from, little bitty pots that somebody bought on the street in Cairo to academic paintings to, I don't know. I mean, Marion, you know what you have. I don't. But I mean, that's the gist of it, right? And then it has been built up over the years. Hopkins has a different kind of relationship with it. I mean, there's Evergreen and there's Homewood House, but Hopkins doesn't have a centralized museum in the same sense. Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
And so when you think about the audience, the community that the arts can bring in at Hopkins, where do you locate that?
I think it's quite distributed, that there is not a single institution that people come to see art, but actually the Hopkins has 3 museums. It has Evergreen House, Evergreen Museum, Homewood Museum, and the Archaeological Museum, which is a study collection that is in Gilman Hall that is used. I'm bringing my class there tomorrow to spend
Great.
time with objects to learn something about
Excellent.
what does that. And then beyond that, there are very substantial collections in the library and special collections. And there is the Frary Gallery in Washington and the new Bloomberg Center in Washington.
Mhm.
So the Hopkins model is more distributed. There is art to be seen and experienced in all of those places. Plus, there is a very ambitious new public art program. So the campus has art out and about. And then finally, Hopkins has built in recent years a very close relationship to the Baltimore Museum of Art, which is as close to the Homewood campus as the Yale University Art Gallery is to Yale. It's right in the middle of it.
Mhm.
And so the question is, how do we utilize all of those resources in ways that advances student learning and faculty research and the mission of the institution? And you can do that in any number of ways. You don't need a single institution for that purpose. You need a vision and a strategy and some resources and imagination. And that's what we're working on now in order to facilitate that. But I think the problem, and I'm sure Marion can agree with me on this, paradoxically, for all the way we've been talking about museums and how important they are, most people who work in university museums would acknowledge that one of the challenges is how do we get people in there?
Right.
Because all these students who are here,
Right.
they're busy. And what's going to get them to come into the museum when they have all these other things to do? So I'm on a task force at Yale thinking about how do you activate those collections? They have 3 major museums. How do you get students in them? And that requires a certain kind of proactivity and imagination, not just open the doors. So I think we all face the problem of knowing that what we have is valuable and important and will advance the mission. But we can't just passively assume everybody gets it. We have to be proactive and thoughtful to engage people in ways that they might not think of themselves.
Yeah.
And that's the art, by the way. Your core question was, how do you balance that tension between collections and what the public might want? That's the art and practice of being a museum professional. It's
Yes.
figuring out how to do that. That's what makes
Yes.
the work interesting.
Yes. Yes.
So, Stephanie, how close are we to time?
We are about 1:30 to time. So go ahead and put it out there.
Understanding your audience, I think is important for any museum. And so we actually just launched a year-long visitor study, so we understand. And we do have that interest, Dan, of activating the museum for the student community. But the wonderful thing about the Cantor is that we're free admission. And I believe we are the largest art museum in the Bay Area that's free. And so we have high visitation. And I love it that we've eliminated that barrier that so many museums face with getting people in the doors. I think one of the most successful academic museums that I've seen in terms of student engagement was Princeton, and I was blown away. And it's not just the formal teaching from the collection in a classroom setting. It is the programming that supports the student engagement and student connections. At the beginning of every academic year, they bring in the student body, focusing on the freshmen, for an evening in the museum that engages the local business community. And so it's called the Nassau Street Sampler. And to me, that is a model. Should I go elsewhere, I want to take with me.
Yeah. Yeah. We are at the hour, and I'm going to draw this to a close, even though I know that we could continue this conversation. I am so grateful to both of you for doing this with us. It's been a wonderful opportunity to hear from you both and to hear from your different experiences and how, as different as they are complementary. And I hope that that everybody who's joined us tonight has the same sense of optimism, and that, I think it might work out, that that I have after listening to and speaking with you both. So I'm going to say good night and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Marion, it's great to work with you. You too.
Oh, agreed, Dan. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.